happen. He actually had some very well-known people that had been sort of vying for parts on this program. I mean, you had people like Albert Brooks. You had well-known comedians and musicians who wanted to get their hand involved in this program. And exactly how this program was going to be put together wasn't really well known yet. You had other variety shows, as we know, in the 70s that had already been out there. We had Carol Burnett already out there that had been successful. They didn't want their show to resemble this.
Yeah, exactly. The the laughter part, you know,
right.
And the laughter on that, Lorne almost despised that. So he didn't want his guys and girls, ladies, breaking character on this, because he's like, okay, don't call our stuff skits.
Right.
That's Carol Burnett.
Right.
And don't break character.
Right.
You know, later on, I kind of Horatio Sands is that, and that I always thought it was kind of funny when he broke character a little bit, and then after a while, it did get old.
It did.
Know?
In fact, I think Lorne Michaels was a real comedy purist. He looked at the way that, which you and I today look at old Carol Burnett skits, and we see how Tim Conway's job seemed to be not to pull off a skit, but to make Harvey Korman laugh, to make Vicki Lawrence laugh, to make Carol Burnett laugh. And I think Lorne looked at that as cheating, that you've lost the writing. You've really diminished the role of the writer of the script. Mm-hmm. And I think Lorne wanted to get back to, let's write a good script that makes people laugh. And I think he thought that the writing is what needed to be valued in his show. That's what he wanted. He valued the writers as much as he valued the performers. And so, yeah, I think he didn't want that to be part of his show, and that's why he didn't like. In fact, I think later on, whenever a skit would come up, I think even the actors started saying, that's too Carol Burnettish, that's too Carol Burnettish, and they would just toss it out because they didn't want that to be part of the show. And so you're right, but you were right. Years later, even Jimmy Fallon, if you look at the cowbell skit, he broke character in the background. You can see him laughing when Will Ferrell starts to do his cowbell routine. You can see Jimmy Fallon in the background breaking character and starting to laugh. That became more acceptable as years went by. But early on, Lorne was really big on, I want the skit to make, or not the skit, but I want the writing to make the people laugh. I want it to be good writing to make them laugh. And so I found that interesting as I was reading through that. He wanted something to be totally unique, and he really valued the writing on that, as evidenced by the two people he valued the most in the early on, which was Chevy Chase, the writer, and was it Michael O'Donoghue?
Michael O'Donoghue.
Right. And who's Michael O'Donoghue, for those of us who don't know?
One of the biggest jerks that was on the show, along with Chevy.
Yeah, well, Michael O'Donoghue was actually in the very first skit of the first episode with John Belushi, which was the Wolverine skit, right? Yeah, he was the bald guy who was the therapist in that skit, and we'll talk about that later. But let's get back to the formation of the show itself. So Dick Ebersol gets involved. Lorne Michaels, he sort of recruits Lorne Michaels in on this. There were some other people they wanted. It came down to two people, and they decided Lorne Michaels was the one they wanted to go with. So they went with Lorne Michaels. Then Lorne Michaels decides he's going to come on board. There was some discussion, should we do this in Los Angeles or should we do this in New York? They decided New York would be the place to go. They found sort of what turned out to be sort of an empty warehouse place in 30 Rock, right? Yeah.
Milton Berle, wasn't he on there? His show?
Yeah, his show. In fact, where they auditioned was a place where they had auditioned and where they had used some of the older variety shows back in the 50s, if I remember right. And it's old studio at 8H. 8H, right, which is today where Saturday Night Live is filmed today. And I've been in that studio, and even today it still looks like an old warehouse. In fact, when you go into the studio itself, I took a tour there. You're not allowed to take pictures when you go in there on a tour, but it still looks like it did probably back when in 1974, 75 when he started the show. And if you look up in the balcony where the audience sits, those chairs are still the same chairs. They have this superstition that says even if the chairs break, you just duct tape them and fix them the best you can because they don't want to replace the chairs because they have the superstitious belief that something will go wrong if you replace those chairs. But he decided to use this old studio at 8H which is kind of a storage room that they used, and he fixed it up. He had a budget of what, $138,000, I believe.
I don't recall.
$136,000 a week, a show, which was not much money at the time, to put this thing together. So he puts it together. So who does he go to? Who does he try to get for this show at the beginning? He
to
help him put this together. He goes to
appearance?
Albert. Yeah, Albert Brooks is wanting to be part of this.
Albert Brooks. Oh, you listen to Albert Brooks. When I say listen to, is reading. It really sounded like he thought he was going to be the permanent host.
Right.
Honestly, though, they weren't sure if they were going to have a permanent host or not. I mean, they were going to have maybe a few rotating hosts,
Mm-hmm.
but from everything I gather, when they went. They got called down to Burbank or back to Burbank by Johnny Carson. They wanted to know their plans for the show, and basically it's kind of like they said we're going to have a guest host or maybe a rotating host, and they said you can have rotating hosts, and you can't 8 weeks before the show that host cannot be on that show before he's on the Tonight Show, and then when he's on or she's on the Tonight Show, she can't be on Saturday Night Live for 2 to 3 weeks or something.
Yeah.
A little window. But it's almost like Johnny Carson started this, and then Johnny Carson they gave their blessing, and then basically, in my opinion, he kind of said, okay, yeah, you're going to have rotating hosts. But they were toying with that idea anyways. Mm-hmm. But Albert Brooks really thought. Every time I read it, all I get is that he thought he was the guy that was going to be the main host for it, and he felt like he got in the shaft.
Right. So Albert Brooks ended up actually making just the short films for them, and so the first episode he had a short film that he made. He didn't actually perform on that first episode.
I think he had his films lasted for the first 7 or 8 episodes, and then eventually he left the show. And but the film still continued. Basically, that's NBC or Saturday Night Digital Shorts now.
Mm-hmm. Digital Shorts,
so,
right? Mm-hmm.
But
so they the Albert Brooks didn't become part of the regular cast. When we look at the not ready for primetime players, he had a choice of people he could choose from. Where was his pool?
How many were there?
What, 9, I believe.
There was 9.
9, yeah, right.
Yeah, we look at 7, but there were originally 9. You know, the other 2 were
Michael O'Donoghue, right?
Mm-hmm. And George Coe. And George Coe, they even though Lauren had a pretty either hard and fast rule or very general rule, he didn't want anybody over 30 on the show. But he wanted George Coe on there just to provide a little bit of stability of performing experience with him. And so far in my readings, I haven't come. Either I'd forgotten. I don't know. Maybe they decided they just didn't need him after the first show or after the. It's been a while since I've watched the rest, and I'm trying to watch just episode by episode right now. So I've watched the first show again about 3 times lately. I haven't watched the second, but anyways, there was others. I mean, there was going to be Andy Kaufman was. He was wanted. They wanted him to be. Not ready for prime time, but they wanted him to be on the rotation as far as a regular. Mm-hmm. They also wanted to be a regular and then eventually join the not ready for prime time, but Billy Crystal.
Mm-hmm. Right. Can you imagine they passed up Billy Crystal?
They wanted he had a bit on the first show, mm-hmm. just like Andy Kaufman did. So. And he was going to do, I've seen it, and just look it up on YouTube, Billy Crystal, potato chips. He's in a jungle routine, and it's about 6 minutes long. They wanted him to cut it, and to cut it down, and they were really reluctant, his manager more than anything. And they said, you got 2 minutes to do this. And he was going to make it work, but his manager said no. His manager is the one who screwed him out of it. You know, Lorne knew that his manager screwed him out of it. Billy was angry later on at his manager. Obviously, he was on later on as a regular on Saturday Night Live, but he was going to be. And then there was one that came aboard in season 2. They just didn't have the money. That's all it was they didn't have the money for him to be on it, and that was, do you remember?
No.
Bill Murray.
Bill Murray. That's right.
He was even on some pre-cast photos.
That's right.
It was I can't remember, just about 2 months before the first show, and then it came about that they just didn't have the money to pay him. So then what does he do? He joins the Primetime Players. And where were they on? The Primetime Players was on Saturday Night Live. Howard Cosell's ABC Saturday Night Live.
Which was a monumental flop.
Yes.
Right.
And that's why they couldn't call it
Saturday Night Live.
It was NBC Saturday Night. They wanted it in Saturday Night Live, but they couldn't because Howard Cosell and ABC had already beat him to the punch. It was live, but when they watched it the very first night, the NBC Saturday Night crew watched it. They just kind of like breathed a sigh of relief. They were like, "This is ridiculous." It wasn't going to be a
threat.
Yeah,
and it was Chevy Chase's departure that opened the door for Bill Murray. Am I right? Right. Yeah. So which was a blessing, I think, for everybody involved, because I don't think Chevy Chase was really gelled real well with the rest of the not ready for primetime players.
There was a lot of jealousy because basically